Okay. What is your answer to mainstream American archaeologists who don't believe there's any credible evidence of human presence in the Americas, tools or bones, at 40, 50, or 100,000 years?
Well, again, it's the process of assimilating an idea. And so when people discovered these Clovis tools, they immediately believed that that was what we should expect in finding the culmination of migrations into the Old World that would ultimately bring these technologies to the original inhabitants who emanated from the Old World into the Americas. So Clovis became the paradigm. It was discovered, these sites were discovered dating to 1200 to 12,800. The technology basically lasted about 600 years. And subsequent technologies were used, were less elongated, if you will, for the Clovis. The Clovis were points that were long. They were designed to kill megafauna. And so the idea that human beings were chasing elephants and everything across the Bering Land Bridge, when the idea that there was a pre-Clovis stage. And the archaeologists, again, Alex Krieger, Ormington, Wallace, Abbott, there's just a lot of people who understood that there was a pre-Clovis stage. And it was called a pre-projectile stage. So in itself, when you define the requirement to be that we were fantastic hunters, questions the, and it becomes a valid point of argument for well, we're going to dismiss anything that doesn't show us, as, you know, Homo sapien hunters, you know, if people were living in the Americas after they discovered the Old World, if the Ice Age, which would have opened the door, but it would have prevented the door back into the Americas from being available to people who had occupied the Yukon for the first time to actually exit the Americas. So the New World archaeological evidence is becomes stymied by the lack of a even Middle Paleolithic repertoire of stones. Monteverdi broke that at 1405. It was buried in peat, and it showed everything that people would have been doing in an environment where they would have had the preservation of the wood, bone, and very simple stone tools that make up the site. In fact, the site was very difficult to find acceptance for, despite the fact that there was seaweed brought from the coast, many varieties. There was like a warehouse or a store, a horticultural store, in one of these huts that they built. And I'll have pictures of these to show this. But if you don't have stone tools, then you have to look at, well, what was first? Were people hunter-gatherers, or were they forager-gatherers? What comes first when you're looking at a definition that finds that you have to have something like what you find in the Old World of Paleolithic tools that were used and evolved in the Old World from lesser tools, which are found in the Yukon made of bone. There were 50 or 60 sites that Richard Moreland found, the Zinc Marsh, in association with that in the Yukon, that have been identified as, you know, ivory and bone tools, repertoire that predates real advanced Paleolithic tools. So if humans left the Americas, go this way, they would have encountered Neanderthals. Neanderthals are making a Middle Paleolithic tool all over the place. You could sink the Queen Mary by just throwing all the stools in if you were to take it down the Nile. It's, you know, to quote Binford. I mean, what's going on here? Why are there lots of stone tools? Well, it's telling us something. It's telling we don't need to omit all of these earlier sites that don't have elaborate stone tools. John Shea is a lead archaeologist in Old World rock technology, stone technology. I was giving a paper in in New Mexico at the Center for the Study of the First Americans, a symposium there. I had a presentation for a poster board. My friend Garman was giving a paper later that evening in audio, in a set forum presenting the paper. My paper, though, drew the attention to some of his students. And John Shea came over to me later, along with his students, and they said, your poster presentation, it says that people had minimal stone tools, or that you're arguing that humans evolved in the Americas. Where are all the stone tools? And I looked at John and his students standing right next to him, and I said, John, almost 20 years ago, I sent you a paper Lewis Binford asked me to send to you. And you're asking me now today, what's the explanation? Well, I never heard back from you. So I'm going to give you the explanation right here, which I'm giving you just right like now, the audience listening. Why didn't you respond? And his students were like, this is the guy who's supposed to be the main guy. Why didn't he respond? The students found it interesting. So this is the dilemma that we're facing when it comes to accepting earlier occupations in the Americas. And it mirrors the exact same thing that the paleontologists of like Alice Hirschlicke and William Henry Holmes dealt with when they said, oh, well, we're only finding in the 1912s and previous to that, all the years before that, we're only finding, and ever since, only finding Homo sapiens. We're not finding this earlier stage of Neanderthals, because Neanderthals, we think, are older, because we see in Europe that we displaced them, and they were uninterrupted until that time that they were displaced. So it's obvious that Homo sapiens couldn't have been Homo sapiens longer in the old world. But when we use that definition to define how Homo sapiens in the New World were required to show the antiquity of the human relationship to Neanderthals, we broke the barrier of reasoning. We decided that in order to have Homo sapiens in the Americas at an earlier date, they needed to look like the pre-modern Neanderthals. So since they didn't, and they don't till this day, we need to understand that prejudiced all future research. People lost their reputations trying to identify earlier Homo sapiens in the Americas that didn't look like Neanderthals. So just like the Middle Paleolithic and the Upper Paleolithic diverged in the Old World at an earlier date, the pre-Clovis, and the question is, what do we do to accept the pre-Clovis? We have to define a paradigm that anticipates that we would have a lesser Paleolithic, a reduced Paleolithic, which is what I call it, a reduced Paleolithic in the Americas. And that's consistent with what Monteverdi established, and it's consistent with what we're going with here.
Okay. Last question, you probably answered some of this. What is your answer to archaeologists and geneticists who have amassed what they believe is very strong evidence that humans originated in Africa?
Okay. Again, I have a 3-part paper that I'm going to be sending to Dr. Mendoza, and along with other people that have read it, including Christopher Stringer, who was well and able to read my paper, which is 42 pages or 45, and it has an extensive reference source. The real issue gets to, you have to repeat the question one more time.
Sure, no problem. What is your answer to archaeologists and geneticists who have amassed what they believe is very strong evidence that humans originated in Africa?
Yes. Well, the Out of Africa paper that emanated from Berkeley, and mostly they started there under the Wilson Lab, and identify that there's a great deal of lineages in Africa that are not found outside Africa, but that they imply are actually older in Africa. And this is not making up what they think. So these lineages that are older in Africa were not carried out of Africa. So in order to accept that theory, there had to have been an incredible bottleneck, which only L3, a more recent, if you will, a more basal representative of the African lineages that are found on top of it. So the idea that all of the ancestral lineages would be carried out of Africa or be forgotten when the exodus out of Africa occurred has a dovetail, and the alternative being the peopling of Africa, the peopling of Europe, the peopling of the peninsula off of the coast that forms Australia and New Guinea, that was populated by humans who had boats and were able to cross into that realm of the world, perhaps at an earlier time than they arrived in Africa and or Europe. So that depiction and that story genetically is contained in a paper in 1983 that predates the Out of Africa arguments and the papers by Rebecca Kahn and Stone King, Mark Stone King, and Alan Wilson, that the basal lineages, not using a molecular clock, just the basal lineages show that Asia, the first stop that would have been out of the Americas, would have accumulated new mutations as they colonized the rest of the old world from an Asian base. And I will show this the results of this study, which was basically very simple and straightforward, and it was published without issue. And in fact, almost every Out of Africa presentation and paper by the authors at Berkeley refer to the Johnson et al. 1983 paper as an alternative, but that they're able to either discount it because they believe in a molecular clock, when really mutations occur because of adaptation and mutations building on top of the previous set of mutations. So that's why a phylogeny out of Asia works so well in determining the trace and accumulation of new mutations that again are found in Africa. And if they are new mutations within the African continent, one can then explain that the lack of the bottleneck, or the evidence of a bottleneck, is that these aren't older lineages. They're more recent lineages, and they're isolated to Africa. That's just the alternative being that they're the ancestral lineages, because they're unique to Africa, and they weren't carried out of Africa. Well, that creates a bottleneck. So that's kind of like a systematic, I'm going to prove something, which they tried to prove over 2,000 runs with genetic data to try to come up with the best one that they could, when the Out of Asia had no problem being published, and they have no problem citing it as the alternative. But again, if we look at the Americas, where you have mutational drift equilibrium and the tribal diversity on individual tribes, that ranks to 70 or 80% of the sub-Saharan Africa, or 80% of all of Japan. These lineages are so unique to the Americas, but they are in balance. They've been there for a long time. In the Old World, when you take these mutations that developed in the Old World, and they mirror a reflective accumulation of adaptations to environments in the Old World, not the real old world, but the Old World we refer to. What's so unique is that there is a basal character. There's 5 enzymes, 2, 1, 1, 1, 1. That defines the original marker, 1. There's 1 and 2 and 3 in one set of enzymes, and there goes 33 different types of markers accumulated in these 5 enzymes. The original study from Johnson et al. And I will post this information. You will see it very distinctly. What's interesting is all of these mutations that occurred even in Europe and Asia and in Africa are not found in the Americas. Only the basal lineage, which is the ancestral type. So the evidence for a migration from the old world into the new world requires that the accumulation of markers that developed from in the old world be missing in the original populations of the Americas. And you can see that's 100% of the American Indians, even off the chart. They have to make the second part of the chart only American Indians because they have none of these other lineages that define the migrations of humans in the old world. So there's no founding effect in the Americas. Not only that, there's no Beringian standstill. In fact, the standstill that they were talking about was south of the ice sheets. And that's where people, like a little poor little vessel, part of the water out of a larger vessel, emanate from a small group, and they dissipate into and expand from that small bottle cap of founding effects in the old world, which develop new mutations on a sequential basis. The new world, all the remnants of the bottle that was left behind, the huge diversity in factors associated with the language and genetics and the archaeological interpretation that there was a behavior before we developed the Upper Paleolithic, and that we're not recently modern. We've been modern for a long time. So that requires that we think about why we dismissed the idea. Because, like I just explained, those are Eureka moments for me. I mean, I have a accumulation of papers that were promoted by Mother Tongue, which I was the editor of, in the late 1990, in the late millennium, just before the 2000. They posted a lot of my ideas, as almost like blog points. I wasn't really aware that they did that. But my friend Gehrman says that, yeah, you were like the first person blogging. Well, I just had the information. And Harold Fleming asked me to be on that as an editor for the Association for Study of Language in Prehistory, ASLIP, which still goes on today, and its journal Mother Tongue, and that he was a proponent of allowing researchers an open place to discuss their ideas, because academic journals are like straitjackets or straitjacketed. Even some people that I work with today, they believe what I'm saying. They're archaeologists. They understand the implications. It seems simple for them, but they were been told that some, at least one, that they can't really do a podcast because I'm not Nova. And in itself, the idea is so controversial that his director might say, I don't think we want to go there. So I plan on going there with those who want to go there. And it's going to be a fun journey. And I'm not upset as much as I am just at odds with why we don't know where we came from. And it's simple. It's as simple as getting it right. And we need to think about what we omitted when we started this search in the first place. That's my answer to that question, and maybe a lot of other ones.
That's the last question.
Well, we're going to wrap it for now. And people are welcome to comment. People are welcome to, of course, try to set me straight, if you will. Also, more than welcome to take this opportunity to do something and investigate something that might not only help human beings understand our relationship to this earth, but also help in forwarding the project, and forwarding something that was dismissed into today's world when we so desperately need to know truth. And I believe, more than I believe, I'm quite convinced that this is a valid assessment of the historical and scientific interdisciplinary study that only an independent person can really take on as a point of order. You know, I think that we need to know that they do study interdisciplinary aspects of things, geology, archaeology, genetics, and everything. But if you don't have a guess, a paradigm, something to guide you, you are kind of looking at all the data and trying to amass it into a concept that works. And unless you have the ability to build on the idea of something you're pursuing, academia is not necessarily going to do that. You're going to be challenging a lot of people, and I am. But these people that I'm challenging know that I am up against something, but it's more important that the idea get out there than, no. You know, science is allowed to be wrong about things. Scientific humility is an important aspect of getting something, knowing something. But the issues that I have already tried to present just here in a short narrative, if you will, is that I am not being trivial about the most important aspect of our antiquity, which is that we have been thinking human beings from time immemorial. To quote how Native Americans see their presence in the Americas. And we do not need to dismiss the ramifications just because we did. We need to undo it. We need to think that it's okay to look outside the box. The cosmos, the galaxies form faster than we thought. Well, scientists who are cosmologists are not dismissing the evidence. They're just reassessing what it means. We need to think about that here in this field of study, field of human origins. And again, appreciate everybody for listening. Any contributions to comments or otherwise are more than welcome. I'm doing my best to keep this idea alive while I'm alive. And it's important that it gets out there. All I want researchers to think. Think about this idea. Thank you.
Off on that.